Omaha, Nebraska. Strategic Air Command, Offutt Air Force Base, October 1973. As Cold War tensions between the United States and Russia simmer, the world remains on edge. Suddenly, an object picked up on SAC radar sends the base onto high alert. Sergeant Ken Storch was part of the Strategic Air Command's top-secret Trident defense.
This alarm went off on the computer, and at the very top of the message, it said, "Alert, alert, alert, this is not a drill." 5 unidentified objects had been picked up coming in over the Pacific Northwest. Joint Chiefs of Staff initially felt that it was a preemptive strike by a Russian submarine and that they had launched ballistic missiles.
According to Storch, the unidentified objects flew over the entire Canadian territory in less than 2 minutes. The UFOs then made a course correction that defied conventional physics. Could it be, as some ancient astronaut theorists believe, that these objects were extraterrestrial crafts visiting Earth?
These 5 objects went across the Bering Sea into the Soviet Union. Richard Nixon was the president at the time. He picked up what we call the bat phone and called the Kremlin, and Nixon said they are not ours.
Is it possible that both nations knew the unexplained aircraft were piloted by extraterrestrials? Might the alien craft have actually wanted to be seen? But if so, why? The next day, CIA and Air Force investigators moved to block the story from becoming public.
I had to sign a security contingency form. This one was specific to this incident, that I would not talk about it for 30 years, that I would keep my mouth shut, and I did.
Could this incident involving 2 of the world's most powerful nations be one of hundreds of UFO events that have been known to governments the world over, but covered up, as ancient astronaut theorists believe? And might this be additional evidence of a long history of extraterrestrials attempting to contact and communicate with the human race? Los Angeles, California, February 25th, 1942. In the early morning hours, something ignites a firestorm that lights up the sky.
That was the famous Battle of Los Angeles. And this photograph that's been all around the world showing all of those arc lights coming up to it. Those arc lights were aimed at a diamond lozenge, eyewitnesses said, that nearly a 2,000 round of Army anti-aircraft artillery was fired. They could tell nothing was interacting. It was as if it had a force field around it.
We fired thousands of rounds. Unfortunately, civilians lost their lives. The next day, no sign of this craft. Could it have been extraterrestrials? All the evidence points to some type of craft not of this world.
According to researchers, 5 years later, a UFO crash-landed outside Roswell, New Mexico in July of 1947. Following this incident and numerous other UFO sightings, the public demanded to know who or what was behind these unexplained objects seen in the skies. The government responded not by answering the question, but by creating the National Security Act.
6 weeks after the Roswell incident, the National Security Act that Harry Truman signed essentially says, to you, as an American citizen, we, the government, don't have to answer that question in the interests of national security.
The sightings and close encounters only continued, and the mysterious visitors appeared to grow even bolder. But was there a message behind these increasing contact events? Washington, D.C., July 19th, 1952. In the skies over the heart of the United States government, multiple unidentified flying objects are picked up on radar by air traffic controllers at Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base.
There were jets scrambled to intercept them. When the jets would get there, they would disappear. When the jets would land, they would reappear again. Basically, it was all over the news, all over the entire world.
So it happened twice on 2 consecutive weekends, meaning that more and more people saw the same thing. They were flying over the heart of Washington, so that is essentially the equivalent of landing on the White House lawn.
According to ancient astronaut theorists, there was a reason that alien beings chose the nation's capital to make contact.
We had a series of UFO sightings that were buzzing the White House, the US Capitol, I think in an attempt to make a very symbolic, direct contact saying, hey, we'd like to talk to you guys. But it just seems to me like somehow we didn't get the message.
In the days following the mysterious sightings over the nation's capital, the U.S. government refused to acknowledge any extraterrestrial connection.
We have, as of date, come to only one firm conclusion, and that is that it does not contain any pattern of purpose or of consistency that we can relate to any conceivable threat to the United States.
In March 2010, a mysterious pulsating light floated over Cleveland, Ohio for 11 consecutive nights.
We're having a sighting right now over the lake. I'm gonna say 270 degrees south. There are 2 objects. One is coming up from the left. These are extremely close to each other. There's absolutely no way these are planes. Right now, what's happening is the initial object that came out, it's sitting there, it's hovering, it's getting extremely bright, it's illuminating different colors, and this second object appeared from, I'm gonna say, the top left of it, and now it's looks like it's moving around it. Wow, they completely just switched spots. Oh my God, this is beautiful. It knows we're watching, it knows we're watching.
The Cleveland sighting is one of thousands reported each year. And while many are proved to be false alarms, others are not so easily discredited.
Right below it. Big bright white flash just occurred.
In 1991, Britain's Ministry of Defense assigned author and journalist Nick Pope to track the hundreds of sightings reported over England, Scotland, and Wales every year.
The Ministry of Defense has been looking at the UFO issue since the 1950s, and the whole reason for looking at these UFO sightings is not necessarily because the department corporately believes in extraterrestrial visitation. It's more to do with keeping a watchful eye on any unusual activity in British airspace. Clearly, if there's something there that's a little bit out of the ordinary, we want to know about it. My beliefs when I was given this job were, I think, what on earth have I let myself in for here? I had no particular knowledge or interest in the UFO phenomenon, certainly no belief in anything unusual. But the more I looked back through the archive of old files, and the more I began to investigate the ones that were being reported to me on a daily basis, I began to change my mind and realize that some of these UFO sightings couldn't be explained in conventional terms.
It's definitely moving.
Many of the most intriguing cases Pope researched involved eyewitness reports from pilots, police, and military officers, while others featured classified radar, video, or photographic evidence.
One case that was a particular turning point for me was the so-called Cosford incident. Now, Cosford is a military base in the United Kingdom, and on the particular night in question, which was 30th of March 1993, there was a wave of sightings over a period of about 6 hours, and there were many police and military witnesses, and 2 Air Force bases, Cosford and Shawbury, were directly overflown by a vast triangular-shaped craft. Now, the meteorological officer at one of these bases described this to me as the size of a jumbo jet, hovering or moving very, very slowly, and then accelerating away to the horizon at incredible speed. He said many times faster than a military jet. And this was a man with 8 years' experience in the Air Force.
This sighting was thoroughly investigated, not only by private UFO investigators, but also by the British government, who were unable to explain all of the sightings reported during this incident.
Another intriguing British UFO sighting took place in December 1980. U.S. Air Force personnel stationed in Suffolk, England, reported seeing a brilliantly illuminated spaceship that landed in Rendlesham Forest on 2 consecutive nights.
It's coming this way. It's definitely coming this way. The two pieces are shooting off. No doubt about it. This is weird.
What made this case particularly unusual is that this was not vague lights in the sky. This was a landed metallic craft that some of the witnesses claimed they got so close to they could actually touch the side of it. One witness saw strange symbols on the hull, which he likened to Egyptian hieroglyphs. He made a sketch of this in his police notebook and took some photos, though he was subsequently told they didn't come out. The Ministry of Defense looked at this, and the Defense Intelligence staff assessed radiation readings that had been taken at the landing site as being significantly higher than background, and that's a direct quote from the government's own assessment.
The British government generated a massive file of information about this sighting report. But at this date, it's very unlikely that the actual truth about this sighting will ever be known.
But in spite of the compelling eyewitness testimony, the Ministry of Defense soon declared the case closed. 22 years later, when the government declassified files on the Rendlesham incident, the evidence was inconclusive. But what stood out was the credibility of the main witnesses, who were trained military personnel.
Obviously, as a UFO hunter, I've met a lot of people who've encountered UFOs. Just flying on a plane, for example. You're on a plane, and suddenly the pilot comes out of the cockpit, and this has happened on 5 separate occasions. And he'll say to me, I saw a UFO over Phoenix. I saw a UFO over Texas. Half my crew saw a UFO. And you'll say to the pilot, well, do you report it? And they say, when the flight controller says at the airport, do you want to report a UFO sighting? And then bursts out laughing, what you say is no. There are UFO sightings every single day. Real people with real sightings of real UFOs. It is very prevalent as more and more people talk about it. Something is going on.
In terms of the government response to all this, certainly in Britain, the Ministry of Defense policy for many years has been to try and downplay this subject, not really in any great sinister attempt to cover up the truth about UFOs, whatever that might be, but more out of embarrassment. There are things in our airspace, we don't know what they are, and that's not a good place for the government and the military to be.
Suffolk, England. The decommissioned American Bentwaters Air Force Base, December 2010. 2 retired airmen have returned here, still searching for answers to a mysterious event they claim to have witnessed 30 years earlier.
It went from a sleepy, boring night to all of a sudden, within a matter of minutes, we were dealing with something we didn't know what it was.
The incident has haunted them for 3 decades and compelled them to finally revisit the site of their close encounter. But why?
Our journey has begun.
John and I knew we were going to do this years ago. That's the strange part.
December 26th, 1980. Shortly after midnight, an unidentified object is picked up on radar over Bentwaters Air Base and appears to go down in the nearby Rendlesham Forest.
Some of the security police saw strange lights in the forest. It was clear to the military personnel that they were looking at something highly unusual and that they needed to go and investigate.
3 enlisted men, including Sergeant James Peniston and Airman John Burroughs, entered the forest expecting to find a downed aircraft.
I could see all these multiple color lights, and I was trying to rationalize my own mind that it was an aircraft crash.
There was a weird feeling in the air. It's hard to explain. It just felt like there was electricity or something in the air. When we got into this clearing, there was something there. And the whole area just lit up in a bright white light.
I was dumbfounded by what was going on. I started seeing a silhouette of a triangular craft. It was completely black in color, except for these occasional bits of blue and orange light and yellow light running through it.
It appeared to me like there was something there making us feel like we wanted to get closer. I was running towards it, it came over the top of me, and then it exploded into blue objects and lights, but I disappeared into what it was. And then the next thing I know, I was standing in the field and I had no idea what had happened.
As Peniston approached the object, he observed strange hieroglyphic inscriptions on its side. Reaching out to touch it, his mind suddenly became bombarded by images of numbers.
It's like someone was holding a picture of this zeros, ones after another. I could see it in my mind's eye. What do they mean? I don't know. The craft was on the ground approximately 45 minutes. Then there was a bright flash of light. I don't know, the craft just took off.
Jim and I both had watches on and it was behind. In other words, when we were finished, it showed like 45-minute difference in what time it really was. But the 45 minutes of missing time actually came from the shift commander and some other people saying that for a while, what they attributed to was they lost radio contact with us.
The next day, James Peniston was compelled to write down the strange series of numbers in his notebook. It filled an astonishing 12 pages.
I pulled out my notebook and started writing them down. I think the part that was okay for me is that once I did it, they went away then. Did I tell anybody? No way am I going to tell anybody that.
Peniston and Burroughs were ordered by their superiors to document the events they witnessed in Rendlesham Forest. But both men claimed they were pressured to leave out certain details of the event, especially those suggesting the craft may have been extraterrestrial.
What I remember is a triangular craft. You know, it didn't have no sharp edges to it at all. It was equally on all sides, black in color, warm to touch. I had to give this sanitized story. I left out everything from the feeling of the electricity, feeling of being drawn into it, also description of the craft. There's a lot of detail that was left out. And truth by omission is not the truth. No, it's a lie.
I didn't want it to appear like the government was trying to cover it up, but I clearly felt that they didn't want me to go into all the details.
For the next 2 evenings, more mysterious sightings were reported by other soldiers stationed at Bentwaters. Yet virtually nothing was recorded except for a top-secret report written by Deputy Base Commander Colonel Charles Halt.
What makes the Rendlesham incident important is really the military witnesses who were involved in this. There are probably several hundred people who are either direct witnesses to the UFO or were involved in a more peripheral sense.
But few witnesses stationed at Bentwaters were willing to go on record about what they saw. The event was kept from the public, and no mention of the triangle UFO was divulged until years later.
Rumors had been spreading about this incident for some time, but it was not until 1983 that the story actually broke in the media after a Freedom of Information Act request. Most were interested, some were more skeptical, but this was definitely a big story.
When pressed for comment, military officials claimed the men mistook a nearby lighthouse for a UFO, or perhaps fabricated a hoax.
We're living in a world that until governments and police authorities say this happened and speak in microphones for TV and radio and print, it becomes a non-event. They know how to control the media.
Washington, D.C., July 19th, 1952. Tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union are at an all-time high, fueled by the Soviets' opposition to American involvement in the Korean War. At this critical juncture, an air traffic controller at Washington National Airport picks up 7 strange objects on his radar screen. But he quickly determines the aircraft are not Soviet military.
From the tower, they were also able to see very large, bright lights moving very quickly, speeding away at very high speeds or simply disappearing.
They didn't just appear and go. They appeared over the Capitol building, over the skies, over the White House, over the Washington Monument.
Fighter jets are scrambled to intercept the strange objects. But as the jets close in, all 7 suddenly disappear.
Some Air Force officers reported that airmen had tried to shoot down UFOs, but had not been able to because the UFOs were able to fly faster than our aircraft.
Days after the breach of Capitol airspace, Major General John Samford, Director of Intelligence for the United States Air Force, addressed the issue at a Pentagon press conference.
We have received and analyzed between 1 and 2,000 reports. There have been a certain percentage that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
Washington was the capital of the United States. So the point was to demonstrate at the height of the Cold War that they were a power greater than us.
And it's sometimes thought that during periods of political upheaval and turning points in history that these extraterrestrials suddenly show up.
What were these strange lights that penetrated the airspace of the U.S. Capitol? Could they have been, as ancient astronaut theorists suggest, alien craft, sent here to monitor this turning point in our history? If so, even as far back as the founding of the United States of America.
Just prior to the Revolutionary War, what a lot of the scientists would do at that time was meet once a month during the full moon, and they called themselves the Lunar Society. And Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson were part of all this. And they would meet to discuss new scientific ideas, life on other planets, and how they could create a United States that was different from other countries